I'm talking to you today about British nuclear policy in the wake of the general election, and I do realize that I am an American talking about this, so take it easy on me in the question and answer. Trident featured heavily in the general election campaign, but I feel that the UK's public debate on nuclear weapons policy is one of the most developed in the world, but it seems rather parochial and very binary. Politicians are challenged to jump to one side or the other of the nuclear fence. Trident is either the last essential defense for the United Kingdom, or it's a deep source of moral embarrassment and financial waste. The result of the election may seem to make this talk a little bit less complicated than I originally anticipated. With a Conservative majority, and bar some extraordinary, unpredictable shock, the decision for all intents and purposes has already been made. Main gate decision on the successor submarine will pass because of political lock-in. But this issue still remains a big one for many of our decision makers, and some politicians, many north of the border, will not let this issue slide away without a fight. Just this week, for example, an EDM was submitted that calls on the government to ensure that the SDSR sets out how it has considered the delivery of UK defense and security capability without a nuclear weapon. And as we've heard from Mr. Arbuthnot this morning, this is a gut feeling issue for the UK. There remain questions around domestic politics, the cost, foreign defense and security policy consequences that ought to concern everyone. And the principal message that I want to convey relates to the theme of responsibility. If Britain is going to maintain a nuclear weapons program, how can this be done responsibly and in a manner that helps create the conditions for a more stable global non-nuclear future? And how can we, as political and thought leaders in this room, reflect upon the consequences arising from deployment of nuclear weapons domestically and internationally, and engage in a mature discussion that serves the future stability of Britain and the international community? Last year, the Trident Commission, in their final report, concluded that reducing nuclear dangers through global diplomacy is in direct security interests of the UK and our allies, and needs to remain a top priority in foreign and defense policy. Every nuclear armed state must account for explicit treaty commitments and obligations to the international community when considering its national security posture and its possession of nuclear weapon systems. The new government will soon begin to consider the security and defense review for the country. And conjecture amongst many, based upon remarks from the Prime Minister in 2014 to the Defense Committee, is that this will probably echo much of what was written in 2010. But the world has changed a good deal since then, and it seems likely that a revised national security strategy will likely reflect the deterioration of international relationships in the European space, challenges of uncertainty, instability, extremism, climate change, global power shifts, the list goes on. A good and responsible review would account for these considerable changes in the security environment and approach complexity of threat in response in an adaptive and inclusive manner, ready to reconsider established thinking and to be open about its shortcomings. Ideally, the review would consider Trident alongside other security capabilities, considering options available and their reasoned qualities, and contributing effectively to our national and international security capabilities. This would be coherent with national security strategy in outlining the specific threats to which these capabilities are designed to respond, as well as be framed within the limits imposed by the Comprehensive Spending Review. This may not happen, but in the least, the review should involve an attempt at a coherent justification for Trident in the light of national security strategy, constrained resources, and be clear about the opportunity costs and unintended consequences arising from this decision, and the diplomatic actions necessary to mitigate these. And let's take a closer look at the budgetary considerations. Estimates put the annual costs between $2 billion and $4 billion over the lifetime of the successor system into the 2060s. Last year, the Trident Commission argued that budgetary considerations should not be a determining factor in the decision over the future of the UK's nuclear weapons system, but at the same time stated that the challenges of financing the renewal project from within the defense budget are considerable. The heaviest capital spend on construction of the submarines falls heavily in the coming 15 to 20 years, and in this period, it will place large strain on the MOD's capital budget. In fact, between 2018 and 2030, about 20 to 30% of the whole defense capital budget shared between the three services will be spent on Trident renewal, and in some years, over a third. And in quoting the Commission, a nuclear deterrent of such capability may be worth the cost, but in these times of high pressure on public finances and on the defense budget in particular, it would be irresponsible to automatically assume it. We also have a responsibility to those who are working on and operating the systems. Just a couple weeks ago, the public was exposed to claims by able submariner William McNeely of the substandard conditions of safety and security on the submarines and at the Faslane Naval Base, as well as the questionable morale of those undertaking the operations. While an inquest by the MOD and a statement from the Defense Minister have dismissed the concerns as either factually incorrect or the result of myths or partial understanding, this is placed doubt in my mind and probably in some of the public of the reliability of this deterrent due to faulty machinery, lack of training, disregard of protocol, number of close calls, and poor morale. And one of the biggest problems for the Royal Navy is retention. Many may think that throwing more money at the system is the answer, but we have a responsibility to be realistic to the taxpayers and to the people whom this system is intended to protect. If the UK is to maintain dangerous and highly complex systems, it must take responsibility and make arrangements to minimize potentially horrific risks. These are not foolproof. There's no such thing as a completely safe and secure system, particularly one involving technical complexity that relying on human management, and implications of any shortfall could be very measurable. And in terms of domestic politics, just like last week, Alex Salmond reiterated in a parliamentary debate that 57 out of 59 MPs in Scotland will oppose the renewal of Trident. It's not enough to determine an outcome if there's a vote on Maingate, but it's a clear signal of differences in opinion and perspectives between Scotland and England at a sensitive political moment for the Union. And the Scottish Parliament elections are next May. So any decisions on Trident could contribute to further pressure for another independence referendum. Political leadership in Westminster needs to take responsibility now for the domino effect that could start happening next year with Trident at the core of it. And what about the international context? As predicted just by about everyone, the NPT review conference was unsuccessful in reaching a final consensus document. While much of this is attributed to differences around convening a conference for a WMD-free zone in the Middle East, others have suggested that it has more to do with bigger dispute over the global disarmament agenda. Nuclear weapon states didn't coherently build upon commitments in the 2010 action plan, and there's no serious suggestions from within about developing the conditions in which these nuclear weapon states no longer need to rely on nuclear weapons for their security. It's deeply troubling that there's no progress, and it's stalled, and there's no clear roadmap for how we proceed as an international community. But now 108 states have signed up to the Austrian pledge to identify and pursue effective measures to fill the legal gap for the prohibition and elimination of nuclear weapons. Without the participation from any nuclear-armed states, it's highly unlikely that this is a game changer that many had hoped for, but it is irresponsible not to consider how it could affect Britain's relationship with other countries if half the world goes down the route of a ban treaty. And I understand the rejection of a unilateralist approach to disarmament in the absence of a multilateral process. I recognize the positive elements of diplomatic positions taken by British governments in the past and currently, steps to climb down the nuclear ladder, and the attempts to bring nuclear weapon states together in a dialogue on disarmament, but we would be complacent in thinking that this is enough. The Trident Commission itself stated clearly last year that while it might not be time for Britain to disband its nuclear mission, it would be beneficial to initiate studies into the conditions that would facilitate a safe move to the threshold status, going on to say that this could assure other nuclear weapon states currently unable to imagine a transition to a world unambiguously free of nuclear weapons, that there are way stations that offer security against reversals in the process. In the absence of agreement in New York at the NPT review conference and the lack of optimism around multilateral processes, it would be a responsible step for the UK community to urgently consider moves to ensure that we get back on track as an international community, to get back in the business of creating the conditions whereby this country's current debate on nuclear weapons and the upcoming decisions we have to make on a successor system is the last one that we have to make.